What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. I have hosted and produced over 2,000 epic conversations over the last 10 years. And what makes our conversations epic? We don't do interviews. We do conversations. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Know that I'm a certified empowerment coach, and the Dr. Vibe Show is the home of epic conversations, and I'm the host of epic conversations. And you know I always like having new friends on the Dr. Vibe Show. And we always aim high, and we've got another high friend, speaking in a good way, on the Dr. Vibe Show today. She has a wonderful smile. If you go to her Twitter timeline, the top of her picture, she's smiling. But let's introduce our new friend, Adia Harvey Wingfield. She's a professor of sociology at Washington University in St. Louis. Her research focuses on racial and gender inequality in professional occupations. She has lectured internationally on her research in this area, and her work has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals, including Social Problems, Gender and Society, and American Behavioral Scientists. She is currently serving as President of Sociologists for Women in Society, a national organization in the United States that encourages feminist research and social change, and is a regular contributor to Inside Higher Ed, The Atlantic, and other popular outlets. She is the author of several books, most recently No More Invisible Man, Race and Gender in Men's Work, and is the recipient of the 2018 Public Understanding of Sociology and award from the American Sociological Association. So we'd like to welcome for the first time, but not the last time, should I say Professor Wingfield? Should I say Adia Harvey Wingfield? What should I refer?
Adia is fine.
Welcome, Adia, to the Dr. Vibe Show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
The pleasure is mine. This article really grabbed me from the first time. Well, we're talking about an article she's written called When Black Men Are Harassed at Work. And in light of what's been going on lately, especially with the Starbucks incident, which is sort of related, but this is from the other end, when black men are in the workplace. And this, I don't feel it gets talked about enough. And we're looking for Adia to really delve down deep into this subject that's very, very important in today's society. But before we get there, we read a wonderful bio, which all the stuff you've done professionally. Where did you grow up? What was life growing up for little Adia?
I grew up in Carolina, in Raleigh, the capital city, and growing up for little Adia was a very good experience. I think being in that environment really helped to hone my sociological imagination and get me thinking a lot about these questions that have to do with race and inequality and gender, and to be more to the experiences that people have and they're in the minority in this setting.
Excellent. And it seems that education was very much important in your growing up years. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, absolutely. My father was a college professor. My mother was a teacher. So it was very important in our household to think a lot about education and to read a lot and to be very observant about how education matters.
Was being a school kid, quote unquote, was there a lot of, did you feel pressure to achieve with parents both in the educational arena?
I wouldn't say that I felt pressure necessarily. Rather, I think it was more so that I had excellent role models and that I was always surrounded by people who really understood and appreciated the value of education and encouraged in me an appreciation for learning and asking questions and being inquisitive.
So going through school, younger years, any challenges? Was it a very easy flow through for yourself?
Well, I think everyone has challenges in various ways and to some degrees. I think that for me, school was always something that I really liked. I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed finding out about new things. But I also was equally interested in what sociologists refer to as the informal curriculum. Those are the things that we learn that aren't necessarily in our textbooks and covered in course material. But I was always very curious about why different groups operated the way that they did, why some kids interacted in certain ways with each other, with teachers. And I thought a lot about sorts of social behavior that I saw happening around me in North Carolina at that time period.
Excellent. So where did you go for school, or what sort of post-secondary education do you have yourself?
Well, I did my undergraduate degree at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and then went on from there to do my master's and PhD in sociology at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
Very nice. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, two very acclaimed institutions. I always like to ask this when someone has achieved such high levels of accomplishment. Do you remember the day you graduated from Johns Hopkins? And if you do, could you share some of that experience?
I do remember that day. It was very meaningful for me because my goal had been for very long to get a doctorate degree and to become a college professor. So finally achieving that goal and crossing the stage and getting my degree was very significant and a very first professional milestone in my life.
Congratulations again. Why did you choose to delve deep into the whole area of Black men and then Black men in the workplace? Because I don't see too many, especially women of color, delving into this area. What was the impetus for you to go into that area?
Well, part of my sociological training has always involved asking questions that are already being asked and thinking about what there is that we still don't know about social groups and social behavior. And one of the things that I noticed in sociology, but in popular culture as well, was that there's a lot of discussion about certain Black men in specific categories. And what I mean by that is that I think we get a lot of discussion about Black men, at least in the United States, who you might think of as the upper class. So we see a lot of stories about Black men who are caught in the criminal justice system, or Black men who don't have access to work, or Black men who live in urban areas who aren't necessarily achieving or who are underserved by various social institutions. But I know from personal and professional experience that that's not a complete or comprehensive picture of Black men. And what I wanted to talk more about and to push us more to think about were the Black men who don't fall in that category. The Black men who are not necessarily in urban environments who are being underserved, but Black professional men who are in high status occupations and who are in middle class professional jobs, and to think more about what their work experiences look like, what sorts of challenges they have. And that actually was the impetus behind my book on this topic, which is called No More Invisible Man, from which I delve a lot of the data that was in the piece for Slate. I wanted to think more about how Black men have experiences that go overlooked if we're only talking about Black men who are in the urban underclass, and what we can learn from Black men who are in professional jobs and what particular insights they might have for helping us get more of a comprehensive picture of society, workplaces, and racial and gender relations.
Would you consider the Black men that are not of the underclass sort of forgotten when it comes to research?
In a lot of ways, yes, I would say that I think that they are, which seems sort of counterintuitive because these are men who in some ways have higher status and definitely higher class positions than men who are in the so-called urban underclass. But for various reasons, in sociology, we don't see a lot of attention to those men. There's a wealth of information where people focus on, say, joblessness or homelessness or educational challenges or the criminal justice system. So we know a great deal about the things that are working to hold back Black men who are poor or working class or lower middle class. But there's really not the same level of attention in sociology, and I would argue in some forms of popular media and our culture, to thinking more and understanding in a better fashion the experiences that Black men may have in professional jobs, and perhaps equally important, the way that their own experiences reflect the ways that race and gender have an impact on them as well.
Excellent. Well, let's get a little bit more into the story. What caused you to write this story at this time, the article When Black Men Are Harassed? What caused you to write it at this particular time?
Right. I've been thinking about this for some time, probably since pretty early on when the Me Too moment happened. And I think the thinking behind this was that I had been observing how valuable the Me Too moment has been in empowering women to speak out, and not only to speak out about the things that they've experienced, but to see that there are actually consequences for speaking out this time in ways that I think there haven't been in the past. If we think about women like Anita Hill, for example, who spoke out very publicly about her experiences and often was derided and wasn't necessarily believed, it seems to me that there's been a real sea change here for how we are about and reacting to issues related to harassment. But in some ways, I also felt that based on the research and the data that I had collected on Black professional men, that there were some limitations to the sorts of conversations that were being framed around this. And when I say limitations to this, what I mean is that it's very important to talk about and think about this harassment as a gendered issue, because it is very much gendered in the sense that women are disproportionately those who are likely to experience some sort of workplace harassment, and often, disproportionately speaking, women experience that workplace harassment at the hands of men. But fundamentally, at its core, sexual harassment is of power. And if we think intersectionally in the way that people like Kimberly Williams Crenshaw or sociologist Patricia Hill Collins encourage us to think about issues related to gender, then we have to be mindful about how for Black professional men, again, gender is complicated by issues of race and class that don't always necessarily put these men in a position where they are quite on par with many of their white male peers. And I started thinking as we were reading more and talking more about issues related to harassment and how the Me Too movement was empowering people, that I had data and had conversations with Black men with whom I had spoken from research about the ways that they also were experiencing forms of harassment that in some ways really mirrored what a lot of women were talking about. And they were experiencing the same thing, the same shame, the same unwillingness to come forward, the same doubts that people believe them, that their experiences intersected with race in really poignant ways were making it easier to silence or overlook the fact that they were also encountering these sorts of issues. So I really wanted to write something about this to try to contribute to the national discussion happening now and to bring these issues further into the lexicon, into the public conversation.
The findings that you share in this article about the unwanted touching, repeated infractions, belief the institutions where they work won't act, did those findings surprise you?
Not necessarily, to be honest. And I don't think that I was shocked by these findings because when we think about the ways, again, that race and gender have a very particular impact for Black men, it's not so shocking that Black men in these types of environments would experience some harassment in some of these forms. We know that historically, for example, men have always been kind of in this fraught position where they have been represented as being sort of hyper masculine or hyper, very, very virile, and that there have been representations of Black men cast in this way that have put them in a very fraught position when it comes to interacting with white women, right? That historically white women have been in a position where, when it comes to Black men, they could make accusations of harassment or assault immediately, be believed, and that could result in death or other very serious consequences for Black men. Emmett Till is a classic case of this, right? So it's not completely shocking to me that these men today would still be experiencing these issues of harassment from many of their, not many, but experiencing these issues of harassment in many cases from their coworkers, because there's been a long history of the sort of stereotyping of Black masculinity and the same sort of racial disadvantage that puts Black men, I think, in a position where they don't necessarily have the tools to combat these issues.
It's interesting what you're talking about here, and applying it to the experiences of Black men in this arena are because you never hear about this. Like, right. One of the reasons that I wanted you to come on is I don't hear about this, not even amongst Black male professionals that I associate. It's never talked about. So was it easy for you to talk to men about this subject? Because I don't hear them talking about it. And how were you able to sort of break that barrier?
Right. Well, I think in the context of the interviews that I was doing for data collection for this project, in my interviews we covered ground about Black professional men's experiences. And I think that for many of the men with whom I spoke, they appreciated that there was someone who wanted to talk about why their experiences were unique and different, and how, again, as Black professional men, those workplace encounters necessarily parallel exactly those that Black women have. Black women have definitely experiences that are shaped by race and gender and class, but because of the nature of those categories, for Black men, these experiences are going to look somewhat different in certain ways. And I think a lot of my respondents were interested in having the opportunity to talk with someone who was interested and who could make sense of these issues and try to help them make sense of why and how they experience certain things in a particular way. And I think because of the structure of interviews that I did, and because they were so all-encompassing, I think that helped in making some of my respondents feel comfortable to share with me what were some very personal and upsetting details for them in a lot of cases.
In your article, on the left-hand side in bold, the quote says, "For Black men working with white women, racial and gender stereotypes about Black masculinity are never far from the surface." Did that come up in many of your conversations? And could you delve a little bit deeper, if possible, based on the conversations that you had?
Sure. I would say that came up in just about every interview that I did with Black professional men. It was extremely pronounced in men who worked in fields that tended to be more female dominated, so men who worked in nursing, for example, but even men who worked in more male dominated professions. They were constantly very cognizant of the type of impression that they might give off to white women, and that they walked this very fine tightrope of being people who were professional, who were competent, who could get the job done, but also always making sure that they never presented themselves in such a way where they might potentially make one of their white female workers uncomfortable. And for many men, this was rooted in, again, long-standing history of the relationship between Black men and white women, generally speaking, and wanting to make sure that they did not evoke the stereotype of the angry Black man or make white women feel threatened, intimidated, frightened, scared, anything like that, because the sense was that that could have very significant career consequences for their professional work.
How much stress does this put on Black men in the workplace? It's enough of a challenge just getting into those white collar areas, just trying to get in a place, and then you have this added challenge where there's competition, in a lot of cases, with white male and female. Mm-hmm. Then they also have to walk this tightrope about stereotypes in regards to white women. How do you cope?
That's a great question, and I definitely learned from my interviews that for many of these men, this is something that's very highly stressful and stress-inducing. Goes above and beyond the everyday work that people have to do in the workforce. It's not just producing your numbers or winning your cases or making your bottom line. It's a whole added layer of specifically racialized stress that imbues to Black men when they are walking this tightrope of making sure that they aren't in any way doing any sort of behavior that might possibly evoke some sort of stereotypical response in someone that could lead to their termination, dismissal, or what have you. So it is very emotionally taxing and stressful for many Black men working in these types of jobs. In some cases, men cope by making sure that they had outlets outside of work that were what we might consider safe spaces. They had people who they could kind of unwind with, who understood exactly what they were going through, or who could be sounding boards for some of the sorts of issues that they confronted. In many cases, one of the sadder parts of my research was that I found for many Black men, they wanted to actually have closer relationships with many of the Black professional men in their workplaces because they felt these were the only people who really understood what they were going through, but sometimes struggled with trying to and forge those bonds and those relationships. So it definitely puts Black men in a rather precarious position emotionally when we're thinking about how emotions are managed at work, or when we're thinking about stress and the consequences that stress has for being able to perform at your best, both in the workplace or in terms of how stress has the consequences for your personal health and for your well-being. These men definitely dealt with a lot of additional challenges that come from having to be in the numerical minority in these sectors and in these environments that often weren't structured in ways that were tailored to allowing them to be their best selves at work.
You say that they express regret that they didn't have closer relations with other Black men in the workplace. Did they give any reasons why they felt that wasn't able to be achieved or is not being achieved?
There were a couple reasons men cited, and I talk about this also in the same book that I mentioned before, No More Invisible Man. Some men wanted specifically to have closer relationships with other Black professional men who, due to just sheer numbers and underrepresentation, often were not present in those environments. So I talked with a number of men saying, other Black men really get what I'm going through, but there just aren't any here. And that makes it all the more difficult to have somebody in this space who really can offer the same sort of social support that perhaps I see other people experiencing. In other cases, men talked about wanting to have closer relationships with Black professional men that they knew or were acquainted with, but described ways in which ideas about gender really kind of held them back. And these were men who would say things such as, I want to have closer relationships with men, but I don't really know how to just go about doing that because that seems like something that women are more comfortable doing. So I don't really know how to go up and say, hey, let's be friends, even though that would be beneficial for both of us. But these men would often note with a real sense of poignancy that they observed the ways in which women of color, particularly Black women, if there were more than one in the office, didn't seem to have inhibitions or reservations. I remember talking to one attorney in particular who told me that he'd worked at a job where he had seen several Black men come and go over his years there and wanted to have a closer relationship with them, but didn't quite know how to build something that they could all be part of. But he also told me that there were 2 Black women in his firm who had both been there, I think, around the same time, but that they had managed to stay at the firm and that they seemed to have a close relationship and they seemed to be able to really forge a bond. He mentioned that he felt that that bond was why they both had been able to stay at the firm, while so many of his other Black male coworkers ended up leaving or looking for other opportunities or not getting part or what have you. So I think there are a couple of reasons why, for Black professional men, they may encounter these difficulties in forming these relationships. But it's really unfortunate because these relationships are things that they want that could potentially really help to make these workplaces more navigable.
With the men you spoke to, what, if anything, did they mention about the relationships they had with women of color in the workplace? Was it something that they were able to achieve? Was there a challenge there? Because strength in numbers, especially, or did they mention about those type of relationships in the workplace that would help them keep on going, so to speak?
Sure, they did talk about those relationships, and they fell into a couple of different categories. There were some men who would responses that tend to fall more in line with a lot of the stereotypes that about women not being qualified for more predominantly male-dominated jobs. And these were men who would say, well, I'm just not sure women have what it takes, or they get promoted unfairly, or they just don't necessarily have the skill to succeed in this sort of position. But those men were not necessarily the majority. What I did hear from a lot of men, interestingly, were that many of them talked about having a position where they wanted to try to speak out against and work to eradicate a lot of the gender bias that they saw in the workplaces. And so these men talked about wanting to make sure that they worked with women, that they partnered, that they were able to form strong relationships with their women co-workers because they wanted to offset a lot of the gender bias that they saw adversely affecting women in these male-dominated settings.
Wow. It just seems that for many Black men, the workplace is a battlefield.
Yeah, I think that can be true, but I don't necessarily think it has to be a battlefield. And the reason I say that is that a lot of the men with whom I spoke, and this very thing on the occupational setting, many Black men go into certain jobs because they see it as something that they have a higher calling for, or they see it as something that can be a vehicle for creating kind of bigger outcomes. I'm thinking specifically about men that I speak to that go into medicine or nursing or fields like that. And for those men, there are definitely myriad challenges that are present, but these men are often driven by wanting to reduce racial health disparities, for example, or create better legal outcomes for people of color who have historically been disenfranchised. And I think that one of the things that we can learn from professional men's experiences is that there are models and ways to think about work that don't necessarily have to reflect this battlefield metaphor, right? In other words, work can be a for many of us, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And many Black men offer a vision and an idea for constructing workplaces in ways that really push for everyone to showcase their particular skills and talents in ways that really benefit the group or the community. But unfortunately, there are too many organizations where these men are underrepresented and don't get the opportunities that they should have to help offer and advance this different vision of work and what it should look like.
In your research in regards to this area, have you been able to speak with Black men of a wide range of ages, and were their experiences different dependent on age?
I have been able to speak with Black men from a wide variety of age ranges. Their experience did not differ as much as I expected, though. I kind of expected that for older Black men in particular, generational changes would have an impact on the perspectives and the ideas that they had about work and the relationships that they had with other coworkers in the workplace. But I didn't necessarily find that to be overwhelmingly true.
So what is that telling you about what does this set up for Black men who want to get in the workforce these days? Because, and I don't know, it sounds like you've been studying this for a while. Are things getting better, staying the same, getting worse? Or is that dependent on industry and workplace?
I think it depends a lot on industry and workplace. That actually is a question I've been wrestling with in my current project, which is due to be released hopefully next year. Work has changed overall in a lot of ways that I think are not productive for many workers. We know that we have growing income inequality, for example. We know the social safety net in the United States is shrinking dramatically. And research by colleagues of mine like Marian Cooper, Jennifer Silva, Victor Chen, overwhelmingly was that a lot of these structural changes are simply not benefiting middle-class workers. They are certainly benefiting lower or working class employees. So by and large, work has shifted in ways that are really dramatically advantageous for many workers. I think that for workers of color, as is typically the case and as historically been the case, we bear the brunt of these changes in a lot of ways. And we tend to disproportionately be adversely affected by these structural shifts. This does not mean, however, things cannot change in the direction that they should in order to be more productive for many workers and for Black men in particular. So I would say that I think that right now, working conditions are bleak for so many people across the board and across the spectrum. The conditions, however, are bleak because of institutional and systemic changes that can be reversed and redressed. And I think once they are, and if they are reversed with an eye towards the ways in which racial inequalities continue to perpetuate more severe and significant consequences for workers of color, that's when we start to see workplaces shifting in ways that can benefit and serve everybody who's in the workplace, not just a certain demographic view.
Outside of the challenges that you mentioned in your article, were there any other ones that you didn't include in the article that may have been mentioned in the book that you have written or books or publications you have done? Were there things not listed there that we should be aware of as Black men and as a Black environment?
I think some of the main things to keep in mind would be that in many workplaces and occupations, particularly professional ones, a lot of advancement happens because of social networks or connections. People get access to jobs because they know someone. They know a neighbor, or they have a family friend, or they have some sort of personal connection to someone who can offer them a position, or offer them an internship, or offer them some sort of access to a certain job. And that's simply become a way that work functions in the modern economy. But again, for professionals of color, for Black men specifically, that reliance on social networks can be are very heavily racially structured. I think recent research from the Washington Post showed that 95% of whites who were surveyed recently not having any close friends who were Black or African American. So when you think about the fact that people offer jobs or offer connections or openings to people that they know, if most whites only are friends with other whites, we automatically have a system where people of color are being excluded and disadvantaged. And that is having an impact on men of color, African American men and African American women who are looking for professional jobs because they frequently don't have the networks and the connections that offer unfettered access to not only professional work, but routes to advancement once they're in those types of jobs.
This is an interesting question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it. Who do you feel is more challenged in the workplace today, Black men or Black women?
That's an interesting question that I can't necessarily be answered quantitatively in that way. What I do think are that for Black women, race and gender have specific impacts on them, such that they are disadvantaged on both counts, right? Particularly in professional settings that are male-dominated ones that tend to be the ones that pay the most and have the highest status. But one of the things that I've tried to show for my research is that when we're thinking about Black men, there, structurally speaking, is a gendered advantage that Black men enjoy by virtue of the fact that they can jobs or can access jobs more where men are in the majority. Think of medicine or law or something like that. But when we look a little bit more closely at how gender intersect for Black men, this isn't necessarily to say that they lose the gender advantage, but that it's a lot more complicated than we think if we only think about being an advantage in and of itself. So I don't know that that's a question that we can simply say, well, Black men have it easier, Black women have it easier. I think that both groups are dealing with intersections of race and gender, put them in complicated positions, predominantly white professional settings, and that those intersections lead to outcomes that look very different in certain contexts.
Do you feel the Black community is taking this subject seriously?
Which subject exactly?
Okay, well, let's just focus on some of the things that you mentioned in your article. Do you feel that the Black community is taking it seriously? Like I said, again, I don't hear about it a lot. But it seems to be a very big issue once you Black men and sit down and talk to them about. I wonder what sort of response have you had from your article and your publications about this subject?
Well, when I talk generally about my publications, focusing on Black men, the best compliment that I've gotten has been from other Black professional men who have said, this is exactly my life. Thank you for writing this book, because this has been exactly what I go through, which feels really good to hear, since my goal is to accurately assess, as a sociologist, the ways in which groups have certain experiences in society. But that's what I'm talking about, Black experiences, generally speaking. When it comes to the specific experience of harassment that I wrote about for the Slate piece, I think that progress is being made, but I think we still have a long ways to go. And if we're talking about the Black community, I'm not sure that that's necessarily, in terms of our response, distinct from what we see from American society at large, right? I mean, again, I just read news today that Harvey Weinstein will be arrested when he returns for counts of his assaults. But again, there are still people who view Harvey Weinstein as one end of an extreme spectrum, and then find ways to excuse a lot of the other behaviors that we've heard about. Those people aren't all African American, right? So I think that we still have a cultural and social problem in this country when it comes to recognizing the myriad forms that harassment takes, the ways in which it's problematic, and the ways in which, again, it's fundamentally rooted in these issues of power and inequality that affect various groups who aren't necessarily in positions where they are in structures where they are empowered. I think that in the Black community, we have a ways to go in terms of really taking what I think is necessary, which is a zero tolerance stand toward harassment. But I also don't think that necessarily puts us further from many other constituencies in the United States who also see fit to excuse people who've engaged in documented numerous cases of harassing and coercive behavior.
So then what do you suggest the Black community do to push this narrative forward?
That's a great question. I think it's important to continue talking about these issues and being mindful of just how widespread and how overwhelming they are, right? The fact that there are so many people who have experienced these issues of harassment that still feel that they should be silent, or that this is something that they personally should be ashamed of, rather than acknowledging that this is something that someone else has done to them that they didn't deserve and have not earned. These are important conversations that we have to continue having. I think, however, the conversations are just the first step, and I think after conversations come the important need to actually take stands against people. Perhaps not supporting people financially when there's been a credible case of this person engaging in abusive behaviors. Maybe we don't necessarily need to go to that person's movies or buy their concert tickets or support their whatever entertainment product that they are putting out there. I think those sorts of actions are just a first step, because after that we have to also start thinking and talking about how we can change our culture and our cultural attitudes and our social institutions in ways that don't encourage or protect people who engage in harassing and coercive behaviors. And I think as Black Americans, we can really be pivotal in having that conversation and being a part of that dialogue. because we do have so many experiences of that in our own communities. But I think the thing that has to shift first is our tendency or our willingness to protect people who engage in those behaviors.
So do you feel, I won't even ask if America's ready for those conversations. We know the answer probably to that, but do we feel Black America is ready for those conversations? If they are, do you see them having them? If they aren't, what does Black America have to do to start having those conversations? Because I feel if Black Americans start with those conversations, then there's greater hope and opportunity that it'll be a greater American conversation.
Yes, I think we are ready to start having those conversations. I think that one of the best things about the Me Too movement is that it has pushed this dialogue forward in such a way that we are talking about how comprehensive and widespread these issues of harassment are. My hope in writing my piece for Slate was to push that conversation a little bit further and to say that if we take an intersectional approach to this, it's not just women who experience harassment, men of color experience harassment, and not just men of color experience harassment, but sure that if you look for research, working class men who are transgender, queer, what have you. There are numerous groups of men who are disadvantaged in some ways who are probably also experiencing similar patterns to what I talk about in that Slate piece. So I do think that, yes, we are ready to start having these conversations. It's critical that we do so because I don't think that it makes sense or benefits anyone other than people who are in positions of power to continue to silence or look the other way when people engage in harassing behaviors.
Absolutely. If young Black men come to you or would come to you and say, I need your thought process of going into the workplace, what would you tell them?
I would let young Black men know that I think that there absolutely is a space for them to succeed in workplaces today. I feel it would be important to be honest and not to sugarcoat the fact that as men of color, there are going to be challenges and issues that they encounter that other groups won't. It's not going to necessarily be a smooth or easy ride. There's a Langston Hughes poem that comes to mind that life is not a crystal stair, and I think that that's absolutely true for Black men in these environments. But I think that it's important to persist and to be mindful of operating both within and outside of these sorts of organizational settings to push them to go further. This is a little bit different than what we've been talking about, but one thing that heartens me to some degree is that I think many professions and organizations are finally starting to catch on to the fact that they have to fundamentally change in ways that will allow them to really be inclusive of groups of color who have historically been underrepresented. And I think that men in particular can play a really critical and important role in organizations to push past where they have been in the past, to think about how they can change aspects of their culture, of their structure, of promotional processes, of their hiring processes, in ways that can be more attuned to the particular skills and talents that certain underrepresented groups may be bringing to the table that have historically gone overlooked.
Well, I know our time has just gone poof, and it's been great. Do you have any? No problem. Do you have any final words for our audience before we let you go?
I just want to say that I hope that as we've been talking about these issues of harassment, if there are people who are experiencing these issues themselves, if they feel comfortable speaking up, I hope that they will not at this point. I hope that they will take advantage of whatever sorts of social support are out there that can provide them with the comfort and the strength that they need to deal with what is an all too prevalent and all too widespread issue. But I hope that people will continue pushing to move the needle and try to change our culture and our institutions so that this doesn't continue to become such a pervasive issue.
Fantastic. If people want to find out more about you and your writings or to read anything, what can they do? Where can they go?
I've written several things for Slate and for The Atlantic. Those probably be the places to start for more of my that's appeared in more of a popular setting. My most recent book I mentioned is No More Invisible Man, Race and Gender in Men's Work. That's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere where books are sold, you can access it. Well, I would suggest looking there if you've been interested in some of the things that I've talked about so far today.
Well, what we will do is we'll put all that information on the post that will have the replay of the video conversation. Also, we've recorded the audio conversation. We will put a link to the book also. I'd like to say thank you so much for taking time in your positive, productive schedule to share with us. We hope, and the mic is open anytime for you to come back and visit, because what you're talking about is very, very, very important.
Thank you so much. I definitely appreciate it. I hope we can connect again.
We will. It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. If you want to watch video replays of epic conversations like this one, you're at the place, my YouTube channel. If you want to listen to epic conversation replays, a number of places you can go to. You can go to my website, VIBESHOW.com. There is Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Tuned In Radio, Google Play Music, and iHeartRadio. You can listen to selected audio replays at thegoodmenproject.com and also WJMS Radio out of Chicago. Also know that I am a certified empowerment coach, president and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching Communications. If you'd like a complimentary empowerment session, you can contact me via email at dr.vibe@drvibeshow.com. Also at Twitter, drvibeshow. You can go to my website, go to the top, click on Contact Dr. Vibe Show. You can then reach me via email, video message, or audio message right from clicking on that link. If you love to eat, like I do, and I think Adia likes to also, I'm a certified brand ambassador for the only online African-American magazine dedicated to African-Americans in food, wine, and travel. The name of the magazine is Cuisine Noir Magazine. The website address is cuisinenoirmag.com. If you're a business or entrepreneur and you'd like to get media promotion, I do run a service called Getting Media Coverage, where I help businesses and entrepreneurs get media promotion so they can elevate their business, product, or service. And finally, every Monday night, or most Monday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, I host an ongoing conversation about CTE. It's in collaboration with the Good Men Project right here on my video channel on YouTube. All right, and that was a nice loud sound. And finally, 3 last things. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. So also, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. And finally, and especially when it comes to subjects like this, block assumptions. God bless. Peace be well. Keep the faith. Thank you so much for watching. And as we say from my heritage, walk good. Goodbye. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. I have hosted and produced over 2,000 epic conversations over the last 10 years. And what makes our conversations epic? We don't do interviews. We do conversations.